Stop. Okay.
Bill Gates is one of the most hated people of all time. There are just countless articles, forum posts, and
Nobody
memes
talks
hating
about
on Bill
that.
Gates. Why? I mean, on the surface,
He's a
Bill
trash
should be
human being.
liked. He's always on the news, appearing to support the masses. He's revolutionized computing. He's at the forefront of climate change activism, while also preparing to give all of his money away to charity. However, doesn't this seem just a little too perfect? Well, that's probably because Bill has spent hundreds of millions, if not billions, on creating his perfect image. He's always on the news and social media, propped up as the wise expert voice on the world. But in your own life, can you name a single Bill Gates fan? In fact, do you know anyone who likes this man at all? I mean, back in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, Bill...
Do you know anyone that likes Bill Gates, babe? Like, that is just, like, really likes him? Like, you know for a fact that they like him? Yeah. I used to like him because I heard his philanthropy was through the roof. And then I found out why he is a philanthropist. Because it's a huge tax write-offs. And he's also doing it to try to get his medications in other countries where they call him the devil for murdering children. So, anyway, sorry. That'll probably come up here in a minute.
Bill was genuinely liked. He was the Elon Musk of the 90s. However, somehow, this all changed, and the cracks in his image are now starting to show. Because the more you start to follow the money of Bill Gates, do you start to understand why
I'm listening,
he's
I'm still just doing this.
men alive. Whether it be for the fact that a billionaire alone has the World Health Organization under his personal control, or if it's the fact that he's the biggest landowner in the US, or his very suspicious close connections to Mr. J.E., with J.E. giving Bill Gates marital advice, and Melinda Gates becoming disgusted by Bill Gates' behavior, not to mention all the countless very suspicious.
Did you know that he had a super close relationship to Jeffrey Epstein? And he was giving him, Bill Gates was getting marital advice from him. And Melinda Gates didn't like Jeffrey Epstein, was upset about this. I had no idea about that.
J.E., with J.E. giving Bill Gates marital advice, and Melinda Gates becoming disgusted by Bill Gates' behavior.
Disgusted by Bill Gates' behavior
other reasons. Because trust me, this is only scratching the surface.
I wonder what happened
Bill Gates,
with Bill
and
Gates.
how did he become so hated? What was it that changed his public perception? Well, to understand why people
the fact that he's a murderer?
We need to start with how he even gained his vast power in the first place. William Henry Gates III, better known as Bill Gates, was born in Seattle on October 28, 1955.
Oh, he was born in Seattle. Big
Being
shot.
the middle child of an unbelievably powerful family.
He's a middle child.
Always expected from Bill, which is why to understand.
He was born into a powerful family? I thought he was. Everything I've ever been told is he was a rags to riches character. Weren't you under that assumption? Dropped out of college, started his own computer company, rags to riches, Bill Gates. Apparently his family has been powerful since the beginning. Elon Gates. Elon Musk was actually rags to riches story. You know that, right? Yeah.
Understand how Bill Gates got to where he is today, we need to understand his family tree first, as arguably it was Bill Gates' family that created the Bill Gates we know today. Bill's grandfather, James Willard Maxwell, was an extremely influential banker. He had served as president of Seattle's National City Bank and was a director of San Francisco's Federal Reserve District number 12 back in the early 1900s.
Wow. So
Similarly,
he was
Bill's
loaded.
parents also held significant positions of power. His mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, was heavily involved in an international charity network called United Way. This organization's honestly in a league of its own.
Did it say head or just involved? Because that's huge.
Charity network called United Way. This Mary hundreds. Similarly, Bill's parents also held significant positions of power. His mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, was heavily involved in an international charity network called United.
His mom was super involved in United Way. The United Way. The big ass, most worldwide, like, charity organization that a lot of people, rich people use to shift funds to other things that they can get a lot of their money back from while making it look like a tax cut.
This organization's honestly in a league of its own. Being founded way back in 1887, United Way is the largest non-profit fundraising conglomerate in the world. In an interview, Bill actually described his mother's role in the company as being part of the group that, quote, decides how to allocate money and looked at all the different charities. Essentially, she was working in a bureau that shows which charities are going to get funded and how much money each of them will receive.
What do I keep hearing on my computer that makes that
William
noise?
Gates Sr. was also extreme. How much
is it in the movie?
She was working in a bureau that shows which charities are going to get funded and how much money each of them will receive.
Like that earlier.
Bill's father, William Gates Sr., was also extremely powerful, undoubtedly even more so than his wife, with him being an acclaimed philanthropist among the likes of George Soros and the Rockefellers. Yet,
Wow.
despite his
Huge, babe. Actually huge. His dad was a philanthropist alongside George Soros. The Soros that everyone's like, bad guy. And the Rockefellers. Bill Gates was never having a hard time.
family's lineage,
I didn't
Bill
know
Gates
that.
was a small kid who was often picked on by his classmates. However, what Bill lacked in brawn, he made up for in brains, easily excelling everyone in his school. And whilst Bill's parents envisioned a law career in Bill's future, Bill was instead drawn to the new and growing field of computers. You see, back in the late 60s, early 70s, computers were big, bulky, and just too expensive
size of
for
a
regular
friggin' house,
people.
dude.
The only way they could be feasibly accessed
And they
was
weren't
by
even
renting
usable.
time on a
Like,
public
no one knew what
computer.
the
And
hell
even
they
that
were
was
doing
still
with them
too
when they
costly
had
for
them.
most people. But because of his wealthy background, Bill was able to gain access to computers at the young age of 13, where he developed a
13,
fascination that would lead him to eventually become the face of Microsoft.
Back then,
In
that's actually
1968,
insane.
Bill would write his first software program, a version of Tic-Tac-Toe, and after doing this, Bill was hooked, and his talent
Dang.
for programming didn't go unnoticed, with his school paying him to gain further access.
So there's nothing wrong, and I will do this all the way through, and even to bad people. I mean, I'll even do this with Hitler. I will celebrate people's accomplishments for them being exactly who they are as they are. No big deal. Like, I don't care. People can accomplish things and still be absolutely evil people. God, I didn't realize this was so heavily glued in here. Yeah, look at that support. Good lord, man. That is a brutal. Yeah, that was a pretty good cut. Good job, me. All right, sorry. We'll go back to it. It was laughable. Damn it.
To gain further access to computers. In return for this favor, unnoticed, with his school paying him to gain further access to computers.
Huh?
In return for this favor,
I feel like I missed something.
eventually become the face of Microsoft.
Yeah, he
In
built the
1968, Bill would write his first software
Okay,
program,
got it.
a version of Tic-Tac-Toe, and after doing this, Bill was hooked, and his talent for programming didn't go unnoticed, with his school paying him to gain further access
his
to
school
computers.
paid him.
In return for this favor, Bill then wrote a program to completely computerize the school's payroll system. But after money from the
Wow.
school dried up,
That's
Bill and his
insane.
friends bought themselves time on a different computer, owned by the Computer Center Corporation.
That's actually crazy.
However, this wouldn't last very long, as
Very
Bill and his
cool.
friend were soon banned after they discovered that Bill had been exploiting a bug in the computer's operating system that gave them extra free time. This was an early sign that Bill wasn't hesitant to break the
Wow.
rules, and Bill was in fact
That's
actually rewarded for this.
kind of
the company that he'd been
scummy.
nicking time from would actually hire him a few months later to find other bugs and exploits in their software. Bill, along with his childhood friend and new business partner Paul Allen, soon went on to form.
Like, you guys will say, oh, well, it's just a kid and computer time should be free regardless. But what you don't understand is the fact that he is doing that there shows early on, at a young age, he did not have a problem exploiting the system to get something he wanted, which is something that says a lot about his character, like who he is as a human being. So you might think, he's stealing time from a computer, but who cares? Oh, time on computers should be free anyways. It's ridiculous that they would have charged him the going rate that they did. The fact remains that, guess what? He should have been doing it, and he wasn't. That's a character flaw. That's like saying, I only sell drugs because I don't get caught selling drugs, and it should be okay because, you know, I didn't go to jail until I got caught for selling drugs. I didn't get in trouble until someone OD'd and died on drugs. Like, there is a lot behind someone's character. If they're willing to exploit something and break the rules, then what's going to stop them from breaking the rules again with other things?
Their first company, Trafo Data, which specialized in developing software for analyzing internet traffic. Seeing as it was their first company, the business wasn't really a huge success, but it was key in paving the way forward for Bill and Paul's subsequent company, Microsoft. In the meantime, Bill continued to excel academically, after scoring 1,590 out of 1,600 on his SAT score, allowing Bill to begin his enrollment at Harvard. However, he soon realized that Harvard wasn't the place for him, as he would go on to subsequently leave in 1975.
The college that he dropped out of? Because I never knew this. Because it made it sound like, oh man, he gave up his future to really chase what he wanted was Harvard. He got gifted into Harvard and he dropped out. So he's just a spoiled, rotten brat. I had no idea it was
After just
Harvard.
2 years of studying, he realized that university wasn't going to further his goals, and instead he would pursue
University
his
isn't going to
passion
further
in computers.
anybody's goals.
1975 would be one of the most important years of Bill Gates' life, because it was around this time that the microcomputer had just been invented. And in 1975,
Is that where they got the name
microcomputers
Microsoft
were
from?
starting to become kind of widespread.
Microcomputers?
One of the first microcomputers, the Altair 8800,
Altair
had been released
8000,
just a
I
year
remember that.
prior. When Bill saw an ad for the computer in a
Not that I
magazine,
remember it
he
back
instantly
then.
saw
I
its
remember
future
it from
potential.
learning
MITS,
about
the
it.
company who made this computer, was then contacted by Bill and Paul, who said that they had created a primitive interpretation software, which enabled people to program their own code into the computer, meaning it could function on its own as an operating system. In reality, Bill and Paul
I
hadn't
always
done any of
forget
what
that
they said
that
they
is
did.
what
But
made
after
him as
MITS
big as
got
he
back to
was.
them
Is
and expressed
Microsoft was
interest in a
actually
demonstration, the door was now
like
open.
that's
And
so
after the
insane to
two
think
worked
about.
tirelessly on their project for 2 months, they finally
kind of
delivered on
nuts
their
to think about
promises
that
to
he did
MITS.
create
A deal
the
was then
first
struck,
operating
and Bill
system,
and
and
Paul's
before
software would
that,
now
it
go
was
on to be
just like
sold
you
with the
threw
Altair
commands at a
8800, and the name that Bill and
Like,
Paul
that's
gave this
huge.
new business partnership,
Basically, it was like
Microsoft.
a
And then in a span of a
computer
few
AI.
years,
Like,
Microsoft
imagine
grew
us
from being a
not
couple of
having
computer
operating
geeks in a basement to a fully fledged company. They continued producing various kinds of software, making a name for themselves and further expanding the company in the process. Microsoft had also expanded its
So
scope
again,
to create
credit
their
where
own
credit's
programming
due.
language
That's
based
huge.
off of their earlier work on the Altair 8800. This was later established as Microsoft Basic and was packaged in a variety
Microsoft
of computers.
Basic.
It was clear that Microsoft was now truly on the way up. The company had increased its team and moved offices to Bellevue, Washington. Gates would be heavily involved in all aspects of Microsoft during this time. He both worked in a managerial role, but also took an interest in the code that his company was writing. Gates actually stated that for the
Nice.
first 5 years, he personally reviewed every single line of code that came out of the company.
So
Microsoft
he
was now dipping their
QA'd
toes into the
everything.
hardware market, releasing products like the Z80 soft card, which let the then popular Apple II run common operating systems that the computer otherwise couldn't. But you see, this was only the beginning. By 1980, Microsoft had scored an even bigger contract. In large part thanks to Bill Gates' family connections, his mum knew the IBM executives and
Weird.
recommended her son's company. So when IBM's first choice of contractor had issues, Microsoft was happy to step in. This gave them a partnership with IBM to produce an operating system for their new computer. The contract itself wasn't
Wow.
financially huge, but at the time, IBM were giants of the tech industry. The venture brought great prestige
So
to
he
Microsoft,
got-
which enabled
He got his foot in the door first because I knew it was through IBM that they did the first big operating system push. And I never knew how. I just assumed IBM was a small startup as well, but apparently IBM was pretty big back then even. Well, they're not big now. And it was because of his mom's connections through the fucking her nonprofit. The one that she worked for. But yeah, regardless. So his connection to his first big money making scheme was through mommy and daddy. And their connections in the big world.
them to take
Taylor's
on
taking
bigger
phone
and
calls
bigger
just so she
projects
doesn't
as
have
the
to
years
talk to
went
me
by.
anymore.
The partnership's developed product was
tired
later
of hearing me
finalized
talk.
and named MS-DOS,
Like, I
an
just wanna
operating
watch-
system that would prove
I
to
just
be
wanna watch my
immensely
movie.
popular. However, this success brought its own problems. Bill and Paul had been enjoying a fruitful business partnership for years, but with Microsoft's unprecedented rise, the pair now had some bitter disagreements. Their disputes were often based on hiring practices and the products that Microsoft worked on. It's also reported that Gates had become distant around this time, as he was often unreachable and was notorious for not returning phone calls. In 1982, the schism
already
between the
getting
two men
God
reached its breaking
complex.
point when Paul was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. This condition meant that Paul obviously had to take a backseat in the company, which Bill saw as another big opportunity. According to Paul, Bill was, quote, scheming to rip him off and making moves to take further control of the company, a practice that was dubbed mercenary opportunism. Bill says that he remembers this very differently, but it's alleged that the
Jeez.
plan was to liquidate Paul's shares in Microsoft, leaving them to Bill and other investors. However, after a few backroom deals, this never came to fruition. Paul still did leave his position as vice chairman, but managed to keep his co-ownership of the company and remain on the board of directors. However, beyond this, there were also numerous allegations that Gates was becoming a tyrant in the company. Witnesses stated that Gates would often berate his employees and their proposals during meetings, forcing them
Wow.
to defend themselves
Shocker.
until he was satisfied with their explanation. However, it was Bill's ruthless behavior that marched the company forward, and by 1985, Microsoft would release their first version of what would later become their flagship product, Windows. It was based on their early work on MS-DOS and would soon begin to dominate the computing world. It was hit after hit for Microsoft, and by 1987 they released the Microsoft Office suite of programs. This was also the year that Bill met his future wife Melinda, and from there, Microsoft and Bill Gates would consolidate their positions in technology, healthcare, media, and numerous other aspects of the world, allowing Bill Gates in this period to become one of the world's richest men. At the time, Windows was the main bread and butter of Microsoft's whole business model, but even without it, Microsoft's power was now untouchable, because back in 1986 when the company went public, Microsoft now had the funds to fuel their expansion into everywhere. However, this certainly didn't come without challenges. Most notably, Microsoft faced fierce competition from Apple's operating system. The rivalry between Steve...
Hold on. Why didn't you get yours? English muffins? Anything? So we only... Okay. All right, sorry. Let me rewind this. My annoying wife distracted me again.
Windows was the main bread and butter of Microsoft's whole business model, but even without it, Microsoft's power was now untouchable, because back in 1986 when the company went public, Microsoft now had the funds to fuel their expansion into everywhere. However, this certainly didn't come without challenges. Most notably, Microsoft faced fierce competition from Apple's operating system. The rivalry between Steve Jobs and Bill Gates was certainly bitter, with Microsoft and Apple being drawn into a legal battle over alleged copyright infringement that went on for years. And yet, as the years went by, Microsoft would still continue to dominate the market, with their release of Windows 3.1 being pivotal in propelling Microsoft to becoming the monopoly it is today. At the time, Windows 3.1 was heavily marketed using Microsoft's new resources. In fact, it was actually the first time that Microsoft had ever done a large-scale campaign, and it ended up totaling over $100 million. And yet this would pay off big time, with
I swear I saw Shadow too.
Windows 3.1 selling over 3 million copies in its first 2 months. This then made Windows the most popular OS in the world, causing Apple to fall behind
one of the only few that actually had it too.
Microsoft's dominance was then further compounded by their release of Windows 95, selling
Windows
1 million
95,
copies in just
dude.
the first 4 days. In fact,
Wow.
Windows 95 was so popular that it was even adopted by the Chinese government as China's default OS. Using the money from Windows 95, Bill would then pour in the extra money into a new technology on the internet. Internet browsers. As the internet was exploding by this point, growing by 2,300%, Microsoft would be quick to release their own version of a browser, and their first one would be Internet Explorer. This would prove to be immensely popular, as it was later packaged with Windows itself.
Immensely
Gates would
popular,
even broker
but
a
it
deal
was...
with his old rival Apple to bundle Internet Explorer with Macs as well as PCs. Because of this, it would go on to be yet another field of tech that Microsoft would dominate in. This was then further combined with tons of other products, many of which held their own monopolies, with Microsoft Office becoming a staple of all businesses and education systems around the world. With all this success, Bill Gates would eventually take a step back from running Microsoft in 1998.
Guess
Although
what?
he was
Monopolies
still
don't
heavily
happen
involved
to
and
the
still
rich.
owned a large part of the company, Bill Gates
We
would
don't
now
talk
take a
about
step
that
back to
anymore,
enjoy his
like
billions.
Disney.
I mean, Bill Gates was one of the richest men on the planet. He'd been worth about $2.5 billion by 1990, and then 10 years later, during the dot-com bubble, Bill was reported to be worth $100 billion. So with this growing wealth, were growing concerns over Bill Gates' power, with the public starting to question if his wealth had actually been legally gained, because people were catching on to Microsoft's various monopolies over the past few years, and this all came to a head in 1998, when Bill Gates was accused of breaking monopoly rules. He was actually forced to give testimony in front of court. This was then compounded
I gotta do the math.
actually been legally gained, because over Bill Gates' power, with the public
Okay, let's do math. Let's do math.
starting to question
100. What? Hold on, I have to do 100 billion. Even though it's just a 1, it's still hard for me. What is 1% of 100 billion? Yeah, $1 billion. 1%. Dude, he could literally give us $1 billion, baby. He wouldn't even feel it. And it would literally change our lives forever. Forever. That needs to be like my new goal in life. How do I get 1% 1% of Bill Gates' money. How do I do that? Take his kids? Kidnap his children? This is Michael Scotch. I got David Wallace's kids here. And if he doesn't call me back in 5 minutes... No, God, no, hang up. Hi, Stephanie, it's Michael. I talked to Michael Scotch. I have David's kids. That's so insane, dude. I like legitimately. I couldn't imagine. I would literally be just stopping people on the street. Not even other than just like I love people and I love giving money. I cherish when I can actually buy people things. I couldn't imagine having that. I could literally give everyone like a population of Placerville. What is it? $10,954. So yeah, you could literally do. What was that? How many zeros? I'm trying to do the math. Why would you move that there? Come on. So that's 1, 2, 3. Yeah. He could come to Placerville, give everyone 10 million. $10,954,000 is all he'd be down. It's nothing. Off of 100 billion? It's nothing. That's an expensive grocery store trip for him. I'm sorry, I know you don't care about this at all right now. It's actually breaking my brain because they talk about people that are like, yeah, look at Elon Musk. Oh my God, I can't believe he doesn't give more money to charities. Bill Gates could literally save a small town and everyone in it, and it wouldn't even hurt him. I mean, at that rate, he could actually give everyone in Placerville $1 billion, because then he'd lose 10 billion off of 100 billion. That's still nothing. What are you gonna do with it? Sorry, what were you gonna say? You laughing at something? Sorry, guys. Gross. What part is the lips? Her lips? Her lips?
Here.
Ball just breaks my. Everything's fine. Name is Tor and everything. I am safe. Okay, back to this nightmare of a human being. Like, I'm sorry, at this point, I do think he is a bad person, just because, like, if I had that type of money, I would just
if
be...
his wealth had actually been legally gained, because
I'd
people were
literally
catching on to
help
Microsoft's
people.
various
Just
monopolies over the past
go
few
help
years.
people.
And this
Yeah,
all came to a head
monopolies,
in
monopolies,
1998, when Bill
monopolies.
Gates was accused of breaking monopoly rules. He was
Yeah,
actually forced
guess
to give
what?
testimony in front of
People
court.
break
This was
monopoly
then
rules all the
compounded by
time now, and it
burst
just
of the
gets
dot-com bubble,
ignored.
causing Microsoft share prices to go into freefall, leaving the company
Disney!
teetering on the verge of collapse. The dot-com bubble and the monopoly concerns had hit the company company so hard that Microsoft's share prices have only just been recovered. It was so bad that it seemed like Microsoft really was going to collapse like many other tech companies at the time. But because of their monopolies and their immense size,
they were safe.
the company could weather these challenges. However, what didn't recover was Bill's reputation, and this was a turning point for Bill Gates, because it was after this incident that the tech mogul would do everything he could to change his media coverage. As Gates had the financial resources and influence to do anything he wants, he would influence the public using a much lower profile method. Over the years, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bill Gates' proxy investment company, would donate about $320 million to various media projects. This included mainstream outlets like CNN and NBC, news publisher associations, as well as foreign and domestic journalist organizations. In fact, Bill Gates' foundation bankrolls so many different aspects of the press that it's possible for Gates to fund entire journalistic careers from their education to the media outlets they work in. Although these donations are publicly listed on the foundation's website, there's no real way to tell how any of these financial grants are actually used by their recipients. Additionally, the foundation only lists financial contributions that were specifically given to media campaigns and outlets. It does not include grants given with the aim of producing articles for specific.
So as Bill Gates was getting destroyed by the media back in the 90s for being a monopoly that didn't fail with all the other .com things like Yahoo and everybody else, guess where he started dumping his shit tons of money into? Media companies. So and there's no way to show what that money went to specifically. And so what everybody would assume is, it's just bribes. Giving them shit tons of money so they wouldn't speak poorly about him anymore.
Academia, such as medical journals or other scientific studies, which means Gates' numerous donations that indirectly affect the media are left unlisted. So in simpler words, this means that his grand total spent on news manipulation is likely much more than $320 million. This is part of the reason why up until recently, Bill Gates has had almost exclusively positive coverage in the news, despite his many shady activities, like for example, his foundation.
Kind of like how Barack Obama said that we're allowed to have propaganda instead of news. He removed that federal law that stated that no one is allowed to have any sort of direct thought. There has to be literally a journalistic integrity by news companies. Now, nobody knows that actually happened because guess what? They didn't allow it to be covered, and it wasn't covered by anyone. So Fox News or CNN or CBS, it doesn't matter. Choose your side. You don't ever get the truth anymore. You literally don't. You know why? Because they don't have to give it. And the news will always choose to tell you lies. Why? Because lies have better ratings than the truth. Why tell your viewers something they don't want to hear when they can turn the channel and find something they do want to hear on that station instead? Think about that. Think about how bad and how manipulative that opens up news and journalism as it is. And yeah, you think I'm lying? It's not a lie at all. Obama overturns, I think it was a federal law stating news cannot be propaganda. This is bullshit. Coming from AP News, Obama did not sign a law allowing propaganda in the U.S. Let's read what this states. Claim and then the truth. AP's assessment. False. 2313, since I can't talk. In 2013, Obama signed legislation that changed the U.S. Information and Educational Exchange Act of 1948, also known as the Smith-Mundt Act. See, let's just look that up. Smith. And let's see if we can find a truthful... Let's see if we can find... This is probably the amended version. I want to find the original. Before and after. We'll see if it's actually true. The Act may be cited as the United States 1948, Section 2. Okay. The Congress hereby declares that the objectives of action enable the government of the United States to promote a better understanding of the United States and other countries and to increase mutual understanding between the people of the United States and people of other countries. Objectives: an informative service to disseminate abroad information about the United States, its people, and policies promulgated by the Congress, the President, the Secretary, and other responsible officials of government landing, blah, blah, blah. An educational exchange service to cooperate with other nations, the interchange of persons known and knowledge and skills, the rendering of technical and other services, the interchange of development. I need like an easy breakdown because this is getting too technical. Long story short, it is the truth. Basically, it was an act that stated propaganda is now illegal. You are not allowed to spread disinformation about the United States in other countries, as well as like our journalists aren't allowed to spread disinformation, therefore acting for other countries instead of our own. And about lies, they can't propagate lies. And the same thing here. Our journalists weren't allowed to do it within our own country for our own people. Smith and Mundt Act. He had that overturned so people could say and do whatever they wanted on the news without repercussion. Because he needed propaganda 24/7 to run his bullshit campaign because Obama was the worst president in the United States next to Joe Biden. Literally the worst. Fight me. I don't care.
Effectively private.
And honestly, he set our country's race relations back to slavery days. Because now, no, not slavery. I'd say civil rights age. Because he took something that was no longer a problem. And me being a child raised in the 90s, I can tell you straight up right now that there was no issue with race. I never saw color my whole life. My whole life. And being someone that was then forced to see color in every aspect and every ratio by making it a thing again, by saying that, oh, there's all these racist things happening. When there weren't. There weren't. I lived through it. There weren't race things happening. It was disgusting. It was disgusting to see people be sold a lie on a racism that didn't exist. And yeah, racism will always exist. But when Obama came into office, it became very prevalent again. It became something that we had to talk about 24/7, and we had to make it a much bigger thing than it was because it didn't exist on the rate that they needed it to start this whole government woke campaign to get everybody in their own little bubbles to fight each other instead of looking at the government's doing. And that's what you guys need to understand first and foremost. And I know I'm going down a rabbit hole, but that's what you guys need to understand first and foremost is the fact that the government, why would they care so much about that? Because it causes dissension amongst all of us. Instead of us focusing on all being Americans, loving each other, loving our country, they want us to focus on the problems they create and pretend to not create, so that when we are distracted by that and arguing with each other, we aren't paying attention to all the shit the government is pulling behind our backs because we're so upset about there's not enough rights for gay people. Oh my god, racism is running rampant again. Oh my god. And every little thing that they talk about there and every little thing that they argue about there is making us miss everything that they are doing because we're so focused on stupid manufactured trash.
Multiple international health organizations. Aside from the US and China, the Gates Foundation is the top financial contributor.
Sorry, we're gonna rewind a little bit since I just went so hard the other way.
So in simpler words, this means that his grand total spent on news manipulation is likely much more than $320 million.
Which is what he used to give.
This is part of the reason why up until recently, Bill Gates has had almost exclusively positive coverage in the news, despite his many shady activities, like for example, his foundation effectively privatizing multiple international health organizations. Aside from the US and China, the Gates Foundation is the top financial contributor to the World Health Organization. These contributions allow Gates to have unprecedented.
So besides the US and China, Bill Gates' foundation is the highest contributing entity to the World Health Organization. Besides two countries, U.S. and China. And you know why China pays them? To keep their mouths shut. And the U.S. pays them because we basically created them. And then Bill Gates. Now, why would he do that?
Influence over public health discussions and decisions. And despite the enormous amount of money that the Gates Foundation has been giving away, Bill's personal net worth has at least doubled since 1990. But Bill won't stop at trying to dominate international health organizations. No, Gates wants to dominate everything. I mean, as of 2021, Bill Gates has become the largest agricultural landowner in America, owning over 269,000
landowner
acres.
in
Gates
America.
has been silently acquiring farmland in many different states and holding that property in a wide network of shell companies through a subsidiary, Cascade Investment LLC. Mind you, he was doing this during the recession of coronavirus, when everyone was shut up in the houses, when the economy plummeted. Bill Gates then bought
he was
out
buying
this cheap
all
land. And the
this
only reason this got
cheap land
discovered was because a research team did some heavy digging on an anonymous Louisiana investor making a $171 million land acquisition. Now, obviously, Bill Gates didn't want his name anywhere near these purchases, because if people realized the biggest proponents of lockdowns was then using this to profit, Gates would then receive a flurry of negative attention. So Gates has been trying to keep this as quiet as possible. However, once he was exposed, he would quickly go for the narrative that agriculture was merely a good investment. But just imagine for a second the raw power and influence that could possibly come with owning so many acres.
A man that was so strongly behind what the World Health Organization was deeming the most dangerous and deadly virus in the world, that he didn't, and he's the third largest contributor to him, took advantage of what the coronavirus was doing by literally making land prices go down left and right, destroying our economy, and weird. All at that time, he used an investment that would have cost him probably double that. So $171 million he bought worth of land, or what was it, billion or million?
Becoming exposed, he would quickly go for it. So Gates has been trying to keep this as quiet as possible. However, once he was exposed, he would quickly go for the narrative that agriculture was merely a good investment. But just imagine for a second the raw power and influence that could possibly come with owning so many acres, becoming the largest landowner in America. By doing this, Gates fully controls what products are grown, how much is produced, how the operations are run, and who works there. And despite having complete jurisdiction over all that farmland, it goes without saying that Gates isn't exactly your typical rancher. The tech oligarch has also co-financed many different kinds of genetically modified food experiments, and is a big supporter of synthetic and artificial meat. Gates believing that we should switch to these alternatives entirely.
What's called artificial meat. And so you have people like Impossible or Beyond Meat, both which I invested in.
Do you eat it as well, or do you like it?
Absolutely.
You do.
You can go to
my ass
Burger King and buy the Impossible Burger.
Now, if you're the cynical type, you could say that acquiring all this farmland really has nothing to do with monetary investments or even feeding people, and instead is all about centralizing power over agriculture and imposing specific dietary limitations over the populace. Or you could say this is just a symptom of Gates' megalomania. But however you look at it, these property acquisitions aren't anything new for Gates either, as he has been buying up farmland all over America since at least 2011. This was also the time frame when Gates really started amping up his influence and cultivating increasingly powerful connections. And funnily enough, it was 2011 when Gates would start meeting with a notorious man called Jeb Stein. And unfortunately, I can't say this guy's real name because this is a no-no word for YouTube. But this man and Gates had met dozens of times throughout the early 2010s, usually at JE's property. The official reason Gates gave for his meetings was to discuss global health and other charitable opportunities. Although these meetings occurred well after JE was convicted of soliciting prostitution from minors back in 2008, which is definitely a little bit concerning. Gates' relationship with JE was also part of the reason for him getting divorced, with Bill's wife Melinda hiring divorce attorneys around the same time in 2019 when Gates' connections with JE were made public. With Melinda stating that, quote, "I made it clear to him that I did not like him meeting with JE. It was also alleged that Gates often visited JE for a respite from his marriage, as that was one of the best methods to, quote, get away from Melinda." And Gates hasn't exactly been transparent with his connection with JE either, stating many times that it was simply a mistaken judgment. When asked specifically about JE's background in a PBS interview, Gates responded with,
"There's absolutely nothing new on that.
And the infamous line,
Well, he's dead, so you always have to be careful.
and with Bill Gates'
He's
reputation
dead, so you always have
collapsing,
to be
the past few years have
careful?
also seen Microsoft collapse too. For most of Microsoft's history, there's been very
What
few
was he
mistakes,
saying
but in
there?
the last decade, Microsoft has seen failed project after failed project. Just think of the Windows Phone, for example. And of course, they've had their successes as well, especially
Windows
in gaming,
Phone.
but their
Lol.
fallback of Windows and other software has stayed exactly the same. They
Yeah,
haven't
their
been able
Windows,
to push the
their
frontiers
Windows,
anymore.
the
They're falling
last
behind.
like 5
However,
versions of
this
Windows
is
have
about
been
to change.
absolute dog shit.
But before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor, Masterworks. Now, as bad as Bill Gates is, he does have a keen understanding of how to use technology to disrupt industries and make money doing so. Today's sponsor, a unicorn startup, is also at the forefront of innovation, revolutionizing a lucrative yet antiquated market estimated at $1.7 trillion, just as it's predicted to grow another $900 billion in the next 4 years. The contemporary art market has doubled the appreciation of the S&P 500 over the last 25 years, while demonstrating no low correlation to the typical investments of stocks and bonds. But what's even more exciting and relevant is that when the stock market is down and inflation is high, art appreciated by an unprecedented average of 33.2% annually. So it's no surprise 2/3 of millionaires, including Bill Gates, already hedge against inflation with art, according to the UBS. The only problem is, unless you're Bill Gates rich, it's been impossible to access. Until now, Masterworks has used technology and finance to disrupt this market, opening it up to investors across the world. Masterworks selects less than 3% of the thousands of paintings that are offered, looking for those with the highest historical appreciation and stability. Then Masterworks acquires the painting and breaks it up into shares for you to invest in. To date, Masterworks has sold 5 paintings with an average net return of 26.8% to investors through 2022's tough markets. And although past performance isn't a guarantee of future results, it's no wonder people have invested over $500 million with them. With no end in sight to inflation, people keep swarming over to Masterworks to help protect their cash. And there is a long wait list to join, but I'm hooking everyone up with priority access to skip the line, and it's as easy as just clicking the link in the description below. Microsoft knows that if they continue at their current rate, they will go bankrupt, and so Microsoft is radically positioning itself to be at the forefront of what tech executives think is the next big thing, the metaverse. We've talked a lot about Facebook's intentions for the metaverse. I mean, obviously Zuckerberg is so invested in it by this point that he changed his company's name, but Meta's metaverse dominance isn't actually inevitable, it's a race. And by recent metrics,
I
it looks
really
like
hope
Facebook
it fails.
might actually
I hope
be
it
losing
fails
this
so
race,
hard,
which on the
because
surface seems
metaverse
great,
is
because,
literally,
as I mentioned in many other
people don't realize that the metaverse, basically what they're saying is they are
videos,
I have no
metaverse.
I have no better way of explaining it than this. Metaverse is the monopoly of all tech, all social media tech and fun stuff like that. That's literally all the metaverse is. That's all it is.
Horrific, and it poses one of the
It's
greatest
terrifying.
threats to
It is.
society as we know it.
It really
which
does.
is why virtual reality's growth in the business world is actually predicted to outpace gaming and other consumer products.
Yep.
This is how big the metaverse is going to be, and it's not hard to understand why either. There are so many aspects of everyday work that will be easier or just work better in VR, and this also gives companies more and more control of our society,
Over
whilst
your
also
brain.
giving these companies
Yep.
exactly what
Making
they
it
crave
look
more
like
of, data. But it's not just data, this is everything. Businesses, jobs, culture, society, politics, everything in a
don't wanna
metaverse
keep talking
controlled
about
by
it.
one or two companies. This is why Walmart,
That's what's terrifying. Sorry, I'm putting
Gucci,
my space bar back and whatever. We'll do it afterwards.
McDonald's, Nike are all setting up shop in the metaverse. It may seem outlandish, but it's already happening. And soon, you might actually be able to become a wagey flipping burgers in the metaverse, working at a virtual McDonald's. And so who are the companies going to control this? Well, it seemed like Facebook was going to be the main company, but there's another company just around the corner that threatens Facebook's entire metaverse monopoly. And that company is Microsoft. And weirdly, it's Microsoft Teams that will be the core of Microsoft's plan for the metaverse.
I hate Microsoft
In
Teams. It's
2021,
awful anyways.
Microsoft announced Mesh,
so bad
which
to
will
use.
enable people to have virtual holographic meetings all from the Teams app. And this
Oh,
seemingly
weird.
simple thing is what's
They were
putting
trying to force
Microsoft
all
ahead
of
other
this
companies. Having their
as
version of the
COVID
metaverse
was
not tied
happening?
to any single type
So
of device
let's
or
run
operating
the
system is
math. Bill Gates created a bunch of virtual meeting things through VR, so you can sell headsets, you can sell software, and he can sell updates through all of them, basically forever and ever and ever. Right? There's one thing, and then he also bought a bunch of agriculture things. So he took over basically all of farming in America during COVID. But hey, why would anybody think someone who creates and manufactures things for pharmaceutical companies like Bill Gates have any hand in something as detrimental as COVID and just make a ton of money off of it? Why would anybody ever use their own brain to realize that he would do this to make a butt ton of money. Man, if only there were some dots to connect here.
Very key. It will make it that much easier for companies to get all of their employees on board. Because everyone already uses Word, the Microsoft Office, and Windows operating system, it will be a smooth transition into the metaverse.
As Microsoft is going into a massive bankruptcy situation. Crazy. Yes, honey.
And that's why late last year, Bill Gates himself said that within the next few years, the metaverse will host your office meetings. It's a bold prediction, but one that's been made by many other tech companies.
Another
and
scumbag.
All of this means that it's much more likely we'll see a Microsoft monopoly on the metaverse, or at least for the professional side, because that's the real goal of all these tech conglomerates. The big ones made their names from monopolies, as we've seen through Microsoft's history. And it's the same with all the other companies, Google, Facebook, all virtual monopolies. And so of course, the same is true for Microsoft. But instead of trying to monopolize OS software, they want to monopolize the metaverse. If they don't do this, Microsoft is going to collapse. Their crown on the jewel Windows is being eaten up by Apple, Linux, and Chrome OS. And so what Microsoft and Bill Gates are counting on is that the metaverse will put even more power into their hands.
I'm thinking about upgrading
the metaverse is their lifeline. The entire company's existence depends on this. It appears that Bill is on a never-ending quest for more, whether it be through money, power, affairs, and control. But no amount of power and influence can continue to convince the public of Bill Gates' likability, because the smell of his true personality is now too overwhelming for the public to ignore.
I'm gonna try Linux out. And if you want to try it with me and you like it,
Theodore John Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber, is one of the most interesting people of the 21st century. Both a genius and a madman, Ted engaged in a ruthless campaign of terrorism by mailing bombs throughout the late 70s to mid-90s, while isolating himself from the rest of society in a small cabin in the woods. For 2 decades, Ted evaded capture, despite being the target of the most expensive FBI investigation in history. But for such an extraordinary life, Ted's early years were relatively ordinary, and at the same time, Ted was creating a revolutionary manifesto. He was using all of his intellect to warn society of the dangerous path that is awaiting us.
And everything like that. So, like if there's something about Linux that you don't like, there's probably a fix for it made by other Linux as opposed to Windows, where you don't get that option. Like how they make like Bethesda makes all of their games open source, so like you can do all the mods that you can on Skyrim because it's open access to the code.
I hate Jeff Bezos, but at the
wow. That video said a lot, and I mean, all of it is accurate and true and painfully and disgustingly sad. So, good times. We're gonna